In the year 330, on the shores of the Bosphorus, the Roman Emperor Constantine dedicated a new capital, built on the ancient Greek city of Byzantium. He called it New Rome. History would remember it as Constantinople. Constantine chose the site for a reason. It sat at the meeting point of Europe and Asia, guarded on three sides by water, and positioned along the empire's richest trade routes. He rebuilt the old Greek city on a grand scale, adding a hippodrome, forums, and a new set of walls. He populated it with senators, lured from Rome by land grants and privileges. Constantine's reign marked another turning point as well. He had already legalized Christianity across the empire, and would later be baptized on his deathbed, setting the stage for a Christian empire that would eventually replace Rome's old pagan traditions entirely. The idea of splitting imperial rule wasn't entirely new. Decades earlier, the Emperor Diocletian had experimented with dividing authority between multiple co-rulers, simply to manage an empire too vast for one man to govern alone. Within a century, the Roman Empire split permanently into two administrative halves, one governed from Rome, the other from Constantinople. In 476, Rome itself fell to Germanic invaders. The Western Roman Empire collapsed entirely. The eastern half did not fall. It endured, calling itself Roman for another 1100 years, even as the language, culture, and character of its people gradually became more Greek than Latin. This is the story of the empire modern historians call Byzantine, though its own citizens never used that word. They simply called themselves Romans to the very end. Compressing 1100 years of history into 10 minutes inevitably leaves out countless events, rulers, and turning points. But the aim here is to trace the through line of an empire that simply refused to disappear. Byzantium's greatest early ruler was Justinian, who took the throne in 527 with one overriding ambition: restoring the full territory of the old Roman Empire. His armies, led by the brilliant general Belisarius, reconquered North Africa from the Vandals and much of Italy from the Ostrogoths. For a brief moment, the Mediterranean was almost a Roman lake again. Justinian's wife, the Empress Theodora, was a former actress who rose to become one of the most powerful women in Roman history. She reportedly convinced him to stand firm during the Hippodrome riots, rather than flee the capital. At home, Justinian commissioned the Hagia Sophia, a cathedral so vast and so radically engineered that its massive dome seemed to float on light itself. It remained the largest cathedral in the world for nearly 1,000 years. Justinian also ordered the complete codification of Roman law into a single unified text, the Corpus Juris Civilis. It would go on to shape legal systems across Europe for centuries afterward. Centuries later, when medieval universities in Italy rediscovered this legal code, it became the foundation for much of continental European law that still exists in modified form today. His reign wasn't without crisis. In 532, riots over chariot races in the capital's Hippodrome nearly toppled him entirely, and were only crushed after tens of thousands of rioters were killed in the arena itself. Justinian's reconquests proved difficult to hold. Within decades of his death, most of Italy and North Africa slipped away again, leaving an empire that was smaller, but still remarkably resilient. Part of that difficulty came from a catastrophe no army could fight. In 541, a devastating plague swept through Constantinople and the wider Mediterranean world, killing an enormous portion of the empire's population and permanently weakening its ability to hold newly reconquered territory. For the next several centuries, Constantinople faced enemy after enemy at its walls, and somehow endured every single time. Arab armies besieged the city twice, in 674 and again in 717, both times for years, both times failing to break through. The city survived partly because of its legendary triple land walls, one of the most sophisticated defensive systems ever built. It also survived because of a terrifying secret weapon known as Greek fire, a flammable liquid that could be sprayed onto enemy ships and could not be extinguished by water. The exact formula for Greek fire was guarded so closely that it was eventually lost to history entirely, known today only through fragmentary descriptions. Bulgars, Rus raiders, Pechenegs, and countless other forces all tested those walls over the centuries. All of them eventually turned back. Behind those walls, Byzantine scholars preserved Greek and Roman texts that had vanished almost everywhere else in Europe, copying and recopying classical philosophy, science, and literature for generation after generation. Without this quiet, centuries-long work of copying manuscripts, entire works of Aristotle, Homer, and countless other ancient authors might never have survived into the modern era at all. The empire's elaborate bureaucracy, its ceremonial court, and its orthodox Christian faith gave it a stability that outlasted kingdom after kingdom around it. By the 10th century, under emperors like Basil II, the empire reached a second golden age. It pushed its borders deep into the Balkans and the Caucasus, briefly becoming the dominant power of the entire Eastern Mediterranean once again. By the late 11th century, cracks were already appearing in the empire's foundations. In 1071, Byzantine forces suffered a catastrophic defeat against the Seljuk Turks at the Battle of Manzikert, opening the empire's Anatolian heartland to Turkish settlement for the first time. Anatolia had supplied the empire with much of its grain, manpower, and tax revenue for centuries. Losing it pushed Emperor Alexios I to do something unprecedented. He appealed directly to the Pope in Rome for military help. In 1095, Pope Urban II answered that appeal, but not quite in the way Alexios expected. His call for holy war ignited the First Crusade, a massive armed pilgrimage marching straight through Byzantine territory on its way to Jerusalem. The Crusaders did help recover some Anatolian coastal cities for the empire, but they also carved out their own independent states across the Levant, creating an uneasy new relationship between Constantinople and the West. That relationship soured steadily over the following century. Then, in 1204, it broke entirely. Crusader knights bound for the Holy Land, diverted by debt, politics, and Venetian ambition, turned their weapons on Constantinople itself. They were fellow Christians. It made no difference. The city was sacked with brutal thoroughness. Churches were looted, priceless relics and artworks were shipped back to Western Europe, and a Latin Crusader state was installed on the Byzantine throne. Venice alone took enough looted treasure and bronze artwork to decorate St. Mark's Basilica for centuries afterward, including 4 bronze horses still displayed there today. It was one of the only times in nearly 1,000 years that Constantinople's walls had actually been breached. Byzantine successor states clung on in exile. In 1261, a Byzantine army finally recaptured the city and restored the empire. But the empire that returned was a shadow of what had come before. Its treasury was empty, its territory fragmented, its population a fraction of its former size. Twice now, a call to the West had reshaped the empire's fate, once as an uneasy rescue, once as outright catastrophe. Over the following 2 centuries, the empire shrank steadily, squeezed by an expanding new power, the Ottoman Turks. Byzantine emperors sent increasingly desperate pleas to Western Europe for military aid, offering once again to reunite the Orthodox and Catholic churches in exchange for real help. That help did occasionally come, though rarely in time and rarely in force. In 1396, a Western crusading army marched into the Balkans to relieve the pressure, only to be crushed by the Ottoman Sultan Bayezid I at the Battle of Nicopolis. In 1439, Byzantine and Catholic representatives finally signed a formal union of the churches at the Council of Florence, hoping it would unlock large-scale Western support at last. The union deeply divided the Byzantine population itself, with many ordinary citizens and clergy preferring Ottoman rule to submission to the Pope in Rome. A second Western Crusade set out in 1444 to enforce that promise. It too was destroyed at the Battle of Varna. By the middle of the 15th century, the once vast empire had shrunk to little more than the city of Constantinople itself and a handful of scattered territories. The final emperor, Constantine XI, inherited a capital surrounded on nearly every side, its population reduced to a few tens of thousands scattered across walls built for a city of 500,000. He knew what was coming. He stayed anyway. In 1453, the young Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II laid siege to Constantinople with an army of well over 80,000 men. He brought something the city's ancient walls had never faced before: massive bronze cannons. cast by a Hungarian engineer named Orban, capable of firing stone balls large enough to shatter fortifications that had stood for over 1,000 years. The Byzantines stretched a great chain across the Golden Horn to block Ottoman ships from entering the harbor. Mehmed's answer was audacious. He had his ships hauled overland on greased logs, launching them directly into the harbor from behind the chain. A small force of foreign volunteers, including Genoese soldiers under a commander named Giovanni Justiniani, fought alongside the Byzantines throughout the siege, reinforcing a garrison that never numbered more than a few thousand defenders. For 53 days, the city held. Constantine XI personally organized the defense, moving between threatened sections of the wall night after night. On May 29th, Ottoman forces finally broke through a damaged section of the wall. Constantine reportedly tore off his imperial regalia and threw himself into the final fighting as a common soldier. His body was never definitively identified afterward. Constantinople had fallen, and with it, the last direct continuation of the Roman Empire came to an end, nearly 1,100 years after Rome itself. The fall of Constantinople sent shockwaves across Europe. Byzantine scholars fled west in large numbers, carrying with them classical manuscripts and Greek learning that helped fuel the Italian Renaissance already underway. Mehmed II renamed the city Istanbul and made it the new capital of the Ottoman Empire, converting the Hagia Sophia into a mosque. The building that Justinian had raised as the greatest church in Christendom would go on to serve as a mosque, then a museum, then a mosque again, its history mirroring the empires that rose and fell around it. In Moscow, Russian rulers began claiming their own city as the empire's true successor, calling it the Third Rome, a title still invoked in Russian political and religious rhetoric today. The Eastern Orthodox Church, centered for centuries in Constantinople, continued on across Russia, Greece, and the Balkans, carrying Byzantine religious tradition forward long after the empire itself was gone. Ottoman control over the old Byzantine trade routes to Asia also pushed European merchants and monarchs to search for new paths to the east, entirely by sea. That search would soon lead to Columbus's voyages and the beginning of the Age of Exploration. For nearly 12 centuries, this was the empire that called itself Rome long after Rome had fallen. It turned back invasion after invasion and quietly kept the classical world alive behind its walls until the modern era was ready to inherit it. That was the Byzantine Empire in 10 minutes. What did you think of this episode? And if there's a historical figure or empire you want us to cover next, let us know in the comments below. We'd genuinely love to know. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.